Good morning, good afternoon, or whenever you are accessing this video. Today's lesson is about what makes up a major scale and how to construct a major scale yourself. So we are just going to get started. Now, in our class, we know one major scale very well, and that is the concert B flat major scale. But for this example, we are actually going to start on the C major scale, starting right here. And the C major scale is a good place to start because, just jumping to the end here, a C major scale is every note from C to C, all natural. So a C major scale, the notes in the C major scale are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and ending with C. So if you didn't know your C major scale before, now you do. And what we are going to do first is look at that C major scale and figure out where are the whole steps in that C major scale and where are the half steps. Because every major scale, or every scale in general, is made up of a combination of whole steps and half steps. And knowing what that combination is will allow you to figure out a major scale in any key starting on any note. So we can do some audience participation type of thing. This will kind of feel like an episode of Dora, but I will pause in between every note and ask you the same question. So we are going to start with the first two notes, starting in between C and D. And I'm going to ask you, is that a whole step or a half step? That's right. That is a whole step because there is a C sharp or a D flat in between C and D. We have a whole step as our first interval. Moving on to D to E. Is that a whole step or a half step? Same answer. That is a whole step because there is one note in between D and E. Now, what about in between E and F? That's right, kids. That is a half step because there is no note in between E and F. So, going up the first four notes, starting on a C, we went up a whole step, then we went up another whole step, and then we went up a half step. And in a major scale, that's how you go from C to F. Continuing on, what interval do we have in between F and G? Well, with a note in between those two, that is a whole step. And if you don't mind me skipping ahead a little bit, we have a note in between G and A, and a note in between A and B. So those are whole steps as well. Then our final interval is in between B and C. Again, there is no note in between B and C. So the last interval is a half step. This order of whole steps and half steps right here, That is what makes a major scale what it is. That is the definition of a major scale. 2 whole steps and then a half step, then 3 whole steps and then a half step. Every single major scale has those intervals between the notes, no matter what note you are starting on. So, to demonstrate that, let's talk about a scale that we know. I'm trying to erase everything. It is not going well. There it is. So let's talk about a concert B flat scale. So unfortunately, this particular example will be very familiar to those of you who start a concert B flat scale on an actual B flat. Um, we just did a C scale, which is good for the trumpets and the clarinets. And saxophones, I guess you'll just have to figure it out on your own. But if we look at a B flat scale, we know that the first note is a B flat. Right here. And our second note is what, boys and girls? Well, that's right. The second note is a C. And once again, there is one note in between those 2 notes, the B natural. And that is a whole step from the first note to the second note of the B flat scale. Now we need another whole step from a C to a D. And then at this point, we need a half step. Now a half step from D is what note? That's right, kids. That is an E flat. Now, at this point, you may have said a D sharp is a half step up from D natural, which is technically correct, but we want to make sure as we go up the scale that not only are we talking about whole steps and half steps, but we're also talking about major seconds and minor seconds. And if it is a second away from the note, then it's got to have a different name. Now, that explanation may sound complicated. Again, we are doing a very quick music theory lesson in these last few weeks of school, but we will basically put it this way: you are not allowed to have 2 of the same letter right next to each other. Obviously, we will start on a B flat and we will end on a B flat. But besides that, all of your notes in the scale, when you are figuring out a scale, they must have a different name. They must be different letters. All right, we are going to move on. We have done a whole step, and a half step, which means that we have one more whole step after this. So from an E flat which we will look at the E flat right here on our piano key note since we have to loop around. We need to skip a note and go on to an F, a whole step up from F is a G, and a whole step up from G is an A. At this point, we should be on the final note, which we know is a B flat. All right, every major scale will end the same way it begins. And we just need to check to make sure that an A is a half step away from a B flat. And of course, it is. So these are the notes of a B flat scale. Again, many of you know this already, but keeping our intervals in mind, now you know how to figure out the notes to any major scale that is asked of you, and that in fact will be your assignment. So the one thing that you have to keep in mind is this order: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Using that, along with your piano keys sheet, which should tell you exactly how far apart each note is, figure out the major scales that are in your assignment. All right, of course, you can let me know if you have any questions, but you kids stay classy.